Hi, I'm Julie from Cultures for Health. Water kefir is a delicious dairy-free probiotic beverage that's easy to make at home. And water kefir is made with a culture, and there's two types of cultures out there. There is a powdered starter culture that can be used one time or sometimes a couple of times. There's also something called water kefir grains, and this is actually what we prefer. Now, water kefir grains, the name is a bit misleading because they don't actually contain any grains like wheat or spelt or rye, anything like that. Instead, what we have is these little crystals that kind of look like grains, and these are symbiotic colonies of yeast and bacteria that exist. And there's a number of live strains of yeast and bacteria in these guys, significantly more strains than you'll find in the powdered culture. Also, we like water kefir grains because they're reusable, and this culture can be used to make a batch and then removed and used to make the next batch. And if you take good care of them, they generally last quite a while. Now, there's a couple of ways to obtain water kefir grains if you have a friend who makes water kefir. Normally, people are willing to share. These guys tend to multiply, and so they often have some extras. If that's not an option for you, we also have them available on our website. So let's go ahead and get started making water kefir. Today we're going to make a quart of water kefir. So let's get started. First we need a jar, and we do recommend using glass jars whenever possible. Plastic tends to harbor foreign bacteria a little bit easier, whereas glass is easier to keep clean. And so what we're going to do is add a 1/4 cup of sugar to the jar. Now here we have what's called organic evaporated cane crystals, which is just a fancy long name for organic white sugar that hasn't been bleached. You can use any number of sugars to make water kefir. You can use white sugar such as this, or white sugar that you find in the grocery store. You can use whole sugars like Rabidura that contain molasses as well. What you want to stay away from when making water kefir is honey. Honey is antibacterial in nature, and since the water kefir culture is a mix of yeast and bacteria, that can be really hard on the culture. So just stick with regular sugar. If you can't find organic sugar, then just use conventional sugar. So we have a 1/4 cup of sugar in this jar, and we're going to go ahead and add some hot water. Now this water is pretty warm. It was boiling a few minutes ago. Doesn't have to be boiling, but warm water makes it a little easier to dissolve the sugar. And so we've got this in here. We're going to go ahead and start swishing this around and just kind of get that sugar dissolved. Okay, so it's pretty good. And now we're going to add cold water to this jar and almost fill it up. There you go. Okay. Now it's very important for the culture that this water not be hot. You want it to be cooled all the way down to room temperature. So my fingers are very clean. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly test, and it is cool. So it's nice and safe for the culture now. What we're going to do now is just add our water kefir grains. So these are our kefir grains, and go ahead and put them in the jar there. Okay, we don't need to stir this or anything, but we do want to put a cover on it because this is ultimately sugar water, and sugar water attracts things like fruit flies and ants. And so you can use a number of things as a cover. You can use a paper coffee filter like this. You could use like a dish towel, something with a very tight weave. You wouldn't want to use like a loose weave cheesecloth or anything that bugs could actually get through. So go ahead and put that over your jar. A nice tight rubber band will keep all the little invaders out. And now you want to find a relatively warm spot in your house for this to set, preferably some spot that is between about 70 and 78 degrees. If it's much cooler than 70 degrees, you run into the potential problem of the kefir not culturing effectively because cold tends to put the cultures into a state of hibernation. If it gets much hotter than 78 degrees, then you end up with kefir that cultures too quickly and can cause problems, and the yeast and bacteria gets out of balance. So if your house is pretty typical temperature, just a shelf in your living room or your kitchen, something like that is generally fine. And so we just let this sit and culture. Now, we get lots of questions about how do you know if your kefir grains are working properly, particularly if you've just started working with them. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. First, a kefir that is fermented for 24 to 48 hours is going to taste less sweet than the sugar water you started with. It's still going to be pretty sweet though. Water kefir is naturally pretty sweet because although most of the sugar is consumed, the sugar that remains has generally been converted to mostly fructose, which is a very strong sweet taste. And so water kefir is still fairly sweet. But when you taste this side by side with fresh sugar water, it's going to taste a little bit different. A little less sweet, probably a little fermented, a little yeasty, that sort of thing. The other way to know if your kefir grains are working properly is to compare the sugar water you started with with your cultured batch. So I have some examples here. I'm going to move some stuff out of the way. Not to spill anything. Okay, so what we have here, these two right here are fresh sugar water. This is the sugar water we just made and put our kefir grains in. This is sugar water made with Rapadura, which is a whole sugar that contains molasses. And so you can see it's pretty dark. So if we compare these two here, we have our fresh sugar water and we have some kefir that has been culturing for 2 days. The kefir that's been culturing for 2 days is much more cloudy than the original sugar water. It's also more of an opal color instead of more of a yellow color. If we move over here to the whole sugar, the Rapadura, it's much, the fresh sugar water is much darker. So we have a much different color once the kefir's been culturing for a couple of days. So the change in color, change in taste are both excellent signs that your kefir culture is working properly. If you've just started working with your kefir culture though, it can take a couple batches for them to get going. That's normal. So put these back off to the side. Actually, we'll want that one. Okay, so once your kefir is done, this batch has been culturing for 48 hours, how do you get your kefir grains out of here? Well, there's a couple ways to do it. My personal favorite is to use a strainer. This is just a really easy way to get your kefir grains out. And so what you want to do is just put your strainer over the jar and just pour the kefir through and catch your kefir grains. And now these kefir grains are ready to go into a fresh batch of sugar water. And you have your finished kefir right here. We just throw a lid on this. You can flavor this with fruit juice or fresh or dried fruit, herbs. We have a really cool video on how to flavor your water kefir you should check out as well. Now there is another way to remove your kefir grains that some people prefer, and that's to use a cotton bag and to go ahead and put the kefir grains inside this bag, and then you want to tie the bag up tight on the top or use a rubber band to keep it closed, and then submerge this bag in the sugar water. So that way you're just pulling the bag out with the kefir grains instead of straining the kefir grains out. This is a very convenient method, particularly if you do not have a strainer set. We have these bags on our site, or you can find them at a natural food store. They're generally the type of bags that are sold as reusable tea bags. The only potential issue with this is that if this bag does not stay fully submerged in the liquid, it can attract mold. So just be careful if you decide to use a bag. I prefer the strainers. I think they're a little bit easier, but there are multiple options out there. And so that's it. You have a batch of kefir ready to go. It's that easy. These kefir grains go back into new sugar water, and 24 and 48 hours from now, you'll have another batch of kefir. Thanks for watching. Water kefir is just one of many cultured foods that you can make at home, including yogurt, sauerkraut, kombucha, sourdough, and more. For more information, recipes, ideas, and how-to videos, check out our website at culturesforhealth.com. I'm Julie for Cultures for Health, where healthy food starts.